Anybody hear that? I'm fairly alarmed here.
Come on, we gotta get out of here. We gotta get out of here. Now, right now.
Fear not, brother. It's time.
I find myself getting more and more frustrated with the political right in America. And it's not because I despise my friends on the right. I was in that camp for 20 years. There's many good and decent people within the classical liberal movement. It's because time and time again, the ideology comes up short. Particularly because many have lost the faith and have accepted indifferentism as a great compromise to religion within the realm of society, leading toward chaos. Understanding that indifferentism at the core root of it really is a devastating form of relativism. The classical liberals always have to deny themselves, deny truth, because the fundamental nature of religious liberty puts all religions and all beliefs on equal par. And this is where civilization begins its collapse. But even more so, it's an essential denial of foundational truths that our civilization was built upon. Though the right has convinced themselves that these truths are based upon Judeo-Christian principle, which I believe is a code word that includes a multicultural facet of Western civilization. In other words, the God of tolerance and diversity always has to make sure that one group of people never gets too much credit. The bottom line is, in a post-Enlightenment society, we have to give credit to Protestants and Jews for playing a role in building Western civilization. Which, listen, I won't speak for the Jews. I don't know that much about Jewish history. As far as the Protestants, they've been devolving ever since the Protestant Reformation. You could argue the Protestant Reformation was the beginning of the end of Western civilization. So how do we include them in this, all-encompassing Judeo-Christian values? We've covered that many times on this show. So understanding and getting proper historical context into place is very important here. The reason why Anthony, Neil, and I chose the title of our YouTube channel, The Knights of Christendom, is precisely because we wanted to convey that ideology that built Western civilization, which was the Catholic faith. A faith that's been consistent for thousands of years. I understand that the Protestant Reformation was a far left turn of our civilization. And then we get to the Enlightenment and we take an even further left turn, which really throws all of civilization off sort of the trajectory. I guess you could say that the space-time continuum was severely altered at that moment in history. And since that time, it's been confusing as to how we intermix our values together with one another, but still trying to find something about the past that we find redeeming in today's society. And in many respects, I respect the conservatives who believe that we need to look upon tradition, go back toward tradition, and find something of a deeper meaning, because we've become a completely soulless society at this point in history. The problem is that when you only go back to the revolution itself and proclaim the revolutionaries as the arbiters of history, you got a problem. Because it was the classical liberals who were the initial revolutionaries that rebelled against tradition. Now, I get it. It's tough for many classical liberals because they look at modern day politics today as their religion. I know that because I was in that camp for 20 years and I fell victim to that ideology. I fell victim to the God of indifference. I fell victim to the idea, okay, well, let's just, religion's important and it's the basis of our civilization, but all we need is the top 10 points of the faith. And as long as we get these top 10 points and we bring everybody in underneath this, broad tent, so to speak, everything's going to be fine. But the fact is, like I've said so many times on my own podcast, yes, the top 10 points of the faith are important, but it's the bottom 10 points of the faith and shape you in the proper mode to properly follow all the functions of the moral authority that God has called us to. But there's an even greater problem that my classical liberal friends have, and that is they deny divine revelation. And at some point, they're forced to pick and choose at what point God speaks to mankind and what are the terms of his condition. And don't get me started on sola scriptura, which is the very animal itself that naturally brings about this destructive nature of indifference and relativism within our culture. Because if you study, like, for example, the classical liberal school of thought that comes from Hillsdale College, they will praise Martin Luther as sort of, unleashing the individual conscience of man and ushering in this modern liberal perspective on how civilization is now so much better because of the individual liberty that every individual has. And yet Martin Luther was one of the biggest scoundrels ever known throughout all of human history. And yes, he did unleash sort of this concept of the individual conscience. But that's precisely the problem. Because once you unleash the individual conscience without any arbitrary authority to govern that soul, to govern that mind, how do you rein in the individual's behavior when they decide to embellish in their own personal sins, just like Martin Luther did? Where is that line of morality that we're not supposed to cross? And this exactly proves this fine line between indifferentism and relativism. In fact, I think what Luther highlights and the rest of post-Western history, post the Catholic Church, is that relativism is the core root of indifferentism. This is where we're at in history at this point in time, where every individual has taken it upon himself to follow his own moral dictates. The question we have to ask is there any overarching principles that are designed to govern morality over a given people within the realm of society? Because that's not what we've done in the West over the past 250 years, or really since, really 500 years for that matter. Because we've taken on this individual conscience notion toward morality, where we've effectively have privatized religion, and to that extent, morality. And this is what we see in our society today. It's not just that people are following their own morality. It's even worse than that. Because we have institutions in place that will radically justify whatever moral code you want. See, this is the concept of religious liberty, where there is sort of this ideological moral code that really fits every individual. In fact, taking sort of the economic analogy, we have a market-based religious system. That's what we have here. I mean, think about it for a second. We throw religion into the strip mall sector of our society, okay? It's not, again, in the middle of the piazza, in the middle of town, where it symbolizes the unity of the community, where it symbolizes the faith, it symbolizes the political system, it symbolizes the culture, and ultimately it symbolizes the family. No. We have removed that from the center of our civilization, replaced it with municipal buildings that are really bland and impersonal because they're here just to sort of run the day-to-day affairs of our cities and our country, I guess you could say. But then we've taken religion and thrown it into the strip malls, right next to the pizzerias and the porn shops and whatever you want to call it, the liquor stores, whatever it may be. Religion itself has found a marketplace in the market system. And thus, just like business accommodates whatever need or good and service that an individual may want, religion plays the same function. This is why you can have 40,000 denominations. This is not including all the other religions. 40,000 denominations within the realm of Protestantism, because you're creating market systems of religions that is there to accommodate every personal notion, every personal desire, and ultimately to accommodate every personal need, whatever individual may need or want out of religion. If you're divorced and remarried, well, guess what? There's a church there for you that's going to support that. If you're gay, there's a church that's going to support that. If you believe that you're saved through faith alone and your actions don't count, and maybe because you got all this sin or the guilt of sin on your conscience and you don't want to give up your sin, well, then there's a church that accepts faith alone. I mean, go through the process of religion. Go through the breakdown of the individual and what the individual needs in order to justify his fallen nature, and you will find a religion that will accommodate that fallen nature. But that's not truth. That's not eternal truth. All we've done is taken religion and faith and contradicted the whole notion of truth, because there can only be one truth in our civilization. And yet, via the concept of religious liberty, we've made a mockery out of it. And what's even worse, the classical liberals, those that are supposed to be the smart ones in our civilization, those that claim to honor God in this civilization, those that claim to honor tradition in this civilization, tell us all the time that this is okay. We can have multiple truths as long as it accommodates the individual. We're not going to haggle over religion anymore, and we're going to call all of it truth in the end. Well, wait a minute. If you have individual moral codes for every individual, how do you ever expect to create cohesion within society? And then you wonder why we're at each other's throats? And what happens when individuals reject religion altogether? Isn't that part of their liberty? Isn't that part of their freedom? And when they no longer accept religion because there's no overarching principles over society, how do you get those people to comply with any dictates of morality? This is what the far left is. And you got no answer other than, well, let's go to the ballot box and beat them at the ballot box. But what happens when you're outpopulated? What happens when the faith, which has been breaking down now for a couple hundred years, breaks down completely, and more people reject religion and faith? See, we already have a nation. We already did the study that was just released a couple months ago, that those that don't believe in religion now are the largest segment of religion in our country. Now what do you do, classical liberals? We've seen how the apostatized faith in Europe has worked out. It's like a complete Marxist revolution over there. You think it's going to be any different here? Of course not. The fact is, the more the faith is lost, the more liberal become in their personal lives. And that will transcend through the family, through the culture, and absolutely corrupt the political system. You want to know why your country is falling apart? You want to know why your country has been heading to the left for 240 years? Look no further than the complete contradiction of religious liberty. This multifaceted truth where we're simply accommodating man's fallen nature. That's not God. That's not religion. That's just man finding a way to justify his own sins. This is why, to me, the right has lost. It's not losing. It's lost already. Because within the realm of your own ideology, you have all these contradictions. If you cannot find a basis of eternal truth or a basis of objective truth within the realm of your civilization, your culture, your country, your town, how are you ever going to have peace and order? We don't have that peace and order anymore. Right now, we have, just for example, in America alone, 260 million Americans, 300 million Americans who have declared themselves to be gods themselves. And they're doing whatever it is they want to do because they're following this personal moral code, because there's nothing above the individual. And what makes the problem even worse is the classical liberal adherence to Enlightenment principles, which abolished religion in the name of reason and rationale, and gave us all these contradicting notions. That religion was going to play a smaller part of our civilization. We're going to restrict it in the private sense. And then, we just govern on a secular basis. Well, we've seen the secular society. It's failed. It's collapsed. I mean, think of it this way. Do you think it's ironic that the grand apostasy that we're all living through in this day and age, the great loss of faith that we're all living through to this very day, has coincided with the classical liberal revolution, with the Enlightenment principles? You think that's a coincidence? You dethrone the church, You replace it with a secular government. You take God's rights and you replace it with man's rights. And all of a sudden now you got an apostatized culture. And I mean, the apostasy is across the board at this point in time. I mean, church attendance is one thing, but general morality collapsing is the other. The breakdown of the family is the other. These are fundamental facts you can't deny anymore, my classical liberal friends. There's too much of a coincidence between the collapse of the culture and the collapse of the family and those beloved principles of the Enlightenment whose altar you worship at. You need to start asking yourselves what has gone wrong within the realm of our civilization. And no, it's not your progressive siblings that are making your life miserable. And while, yes, there's a lot to blame for those that have gone to the far left, the very tools, the very weapons they've used to bring down civilization, you've given them through this godless, secular system of governance that you've lost control over. They're simply taking your own principles to its most logical conclusion. And you guys don't even see that. You've taken religion out of the realm of the culture, out of the realm of society, out of the family. You tell everybody, follow your own personal moral code. The left is now doing that, and now you're angry at the left because they're doing what you suggested they could do, and that is follow a moral code or follow no code at all because that's their freedom, that's their liberty. How's that supposed to work? The right in America, and really across the globe, needs to understand that this indifferent approach toward religion is exactly what's destroying our civilization and destroying this country. And it's about time we had a conversation on religion, had a conversation on faith, and use the 2,000-year analogy of the faith to examine faith and religion. And to begin to say that, well, maybe having all these multiple truths and all these indifferent approaches toward religion, maybe that's the problem. Because we have individuals that are taking, again, their liberties wherever they want to take them to. And none of this makes sense anymore. And listen, as I wrap this short podcast up here, one final point I want to make, and I think this could be the most important point of all, and that is, why do the classical liberals take this indifferent approach toward religion? Because an individual that believes and seeks eternal truth will never come to such a conclusion that we need to water down truth in order to come to truth in some capacity. I think when you study the Enlightenment thinkers, particularly Locke, Rousseau, Descartes, and these guys, they were not great men of faith. Let's be honest. And I think if you follow all the major figures within the Enlightenment, they were not men of faith. And I think there's something to be said and something to be understood there. That if they're not men of faith, why would they ever promote what is right and just in the name of faith to begin with? I think that's important. I think when they attack the church, it's not necessarily about their secular concepts of freedom and liberty. It's their sheer hatred of the church itself and what it represented. Let's not forget the great crimes against the church in the name of liberty that started really at the Protestant Reformation, but we'll set that aside for now because the classical liberals never really want to go back that far anyways. They're not interested in that. But at least to the Enlightenment. It wasn't this, great exchange of ideas where we use logic and reason to prove that there's no God. No, we put the Catholics to death. We literally behead this enemy we call Christianity. And I guess that's what I kind of want to end upon. Because it's interesting, every time I've had conversation with my classical liberal friends, and I talk about the reinstitution of Christendom in some capacity, I'm always met with this idea that, oh, Frank, you want to put a gun to everybody's head. You want to force your religion down everybody's throat, and you want to cut everybody's heads off. Yeah. I love when I get that one. The Christian faith, or the origins of the Christian faith, began during the time of the Roman Empire, where Christianity was not only deemed illegal, but was dealt in the most hostile manner. Where for the first 400 years of the Christian Catholic faith, those that believed in Christ, those that protected and defended the Gospels, suffered mightily, including unto death. And we have many great examples of the martyrs of the church. That's why we say as Catholics that the blood of the martyrs is the foundation of the church. And it was through an organic movement of spreading the Gospels that the Catholic faith spread. Sure, it gets some help in the 4th century when you have the emperor that converts to Christianity. Of course that. But the faith was already starting to flourish by that time. And even by the time he converts, it's only a matter of time. See, what is interesting to me is the same classical liberals who are always in the constant state of revolution, that believe that if they don't get their way, that their enemies are going to kill them or blow their heads off or cut their heads off, are the very same people that support the ideology that did the cutting off of the heads, or that put the guns to the heads of people. Christianity was spread by organic means. Catholicism was spread by organic means, by faith. The revolution of the Masons, the Enlightenment principles, the classical liberals, that was not spread by organic means. That was spread by the guillotine, by the gun in the head, by forced will. You were going to be forced to be free. That's the irony of it all. And so when we talk about Christendom and restoring Christendom, never fall for the trap of the idea that we want to put a gun to somebody's head. They're projecting their own sins onto us. And what's interesting is that the classical liberals pull this on their progressive siblings all the time, because they always say their progressive siblings are projecting their sins onto the classical liberals. Well, the classical liberals have done the same thing to the Catholics and to the traditionalists. They project their own sins on everybody else. The popes have never had armies. The popes have actually always condemned the forced submission of faith. Faith has to be of goodwill, has to be of just will. That's how the Catholic Church has always taught. Catholicism has never spread by the sword or by putting a gun to somebody's head. Only post-Enlightenment society did that. Whether it was through the Marxist revolutions or through the classical liberal revolutions, they're projecting their own sins onto their enemies, or at least who they perceive their enemies to be. That's the irony of it all. You're asking me why the classical liberals accept this indifferent version of religion? I'll tell you why, because I don't believe they have true faith. Sure, they think about religion in this abstract way because one day we're all going to die. One day we're all going to wind up in the grave. I get that. And we all want a nice place to go afterwards. But the concept of obedience is simply not in the blood of the classical liberals. They're revolutionaries by origin. And far be it this notion that we would set up a grand moral authority to govern over society as a whole, but even more so over the fallen nature of the individual. They can never stand for that. And for that reason, it's why we're going through this proverbial cultural and political chaos through our Western civilization, with really no more answers left by anybody. And I think with that, who better off than to end with the perfect quote than Maximilian Kolbe, Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who said, quote, "The most deadly poison of our times is indifference." And this is true. The indifference toward religion essentially calls God and his divine revelation, which he revealed to mankind, nothing but a lie, where mankind can really set up his own moral code and find a way to justify not only his fallen nature, but also his sin. Let's be honest here. This starts at the Protestant Reformation with the concept of sola fide, faith alone, so works don't matter. We take that to the next level during the Enlightenment, where it goes from not just a religious scale during the Reformation, but we take it into the political sphere during the Enlightenment. Listen, I said so many times before, the greatest battle mankind has ever faced is the battle against sin. It starts not only just in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, but it really starts at the battle up in heaven, when Lucifer rebelled against God, and Michael and the angels had to really usher him down to the earth here, I guess you could say. Anything that's conceived under the concept of rebellion, I think you should be skeptical of. Because all the greatest evils in the history of the world have come through the concept of rebellion. Rejecting authority and justifying it via the rebellion. That's what we have in our revolution, where, never mind all the political revolutions that we read about in the history books in high school or college or whatever it may be, but look at all the personal revolutions that happen to this very day, where every individual human being, every individual man, woman, and child has declared themselves to be a god and in essence declared his own personal rebellion. This is why civilization is collapsing, and this is all fueled through the God of indifference. Until we define eternal truths and honor divine revelation that was revealed to us by God, we have no future. We have no hope, and we will never have peace. This is why the West is collapsing, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank, signing off for the Knights of Christendom. Good night, everybody.